and I will use the opportunity to have a keynote today in order to discuss how collaboration will allow us to scale the internet for video. I will do so by starting and giving you a perspective of what happened over the last 12 months since the last time I was here presenting. So last year, Content Delivery Summit 2014, I was standing here and most likely providing three main points. The first point was something that is very clear to everyone in this room. Video is growing exponentially. Let's call it 100% year over year. Video has been designed for caching, both the video on demand and the live streaming element of it. And we have to find a way to collaborate in order to make it a network function that will allow us to take it deeper into carrier's network all the way to the last mile, reducing the latency. And I think that's something that is very clear to us today, a year after. Latency and the ability to improve quality of experience is probably the biggest driver for caching being adopted in more and more mobile network, both reducing the spend on the radio access network, because if we are able to reduce latency even by 20% in large networks, the largest mobile networks worldwide, we are reducing the CapEx spending by 10%. And these are $1 billion of budgets that are being spent. Caching as a network function allows us to reduce latency. And if you ask YouTube specifically, with whom we had discussion just 2 weeks ago, if we are able to reduce latency by 20% for them, they would like to see that network function operating in carrier's network. And the last point that we've made last year was that there are practically today two options for scaling video using caching across the network. And one is the open architecture that I will discuss in a bit, and the other one is the closed architecture that you mostly see being promoted and deployed by the largest video providers, namely Netflix and YouTube. These guys grew exponentially over the last few years, and they didn't find any other choice to build their own content delivery systems and practically move out of the Akamai Limelight Level 3 services and have their own system. They have a closed system, and eventually we ask ourselves, if we have 20, 30, 40 content providers moving forward, would every one of them have to develop their own content delivery network, or can we find an open architecture that will allow everything to scale to carrier's network in a way like we are seeing the IP network scaling today without anyone has to develop everything time after time again. 12 months fast forward, and we are standing here today. The most significant thing that happened in our view in the industry was the announcement of the Streaming Video Alliance just 6 months ago. We founded a forum that brings together the entire ecosystem to work in collaboration for open standards and best practices around online video in general, open caching being only one of them. The most fascinating thing about it is that even though we started looking for a way to scale an architecture for open caching, we found that the entire ecosystem are vying for ways to find best practices that will allow them to scale. So for example, we have today, and by the way, we are going to have the board meeting of the Streaming Video Alliance in this venue tomorrow, in the first general meeting. There are more than 200 registrations that are going to open up in June with corporations that would like to join. We view it today as a forum that would be equivalent to ITF for scaling online video, like ITF scaled the IP delivery. Most of you would probably ask, where is Netflix and YouTube? We are in constant discussion with them, and we expect them to join the next 6 months. They want to see more momentum coming out of it, and luckily the momentum is there. So I expect by next year, I expect them to be part of this forum. So just to give you a sense about the activities that we are seeking in this forum, in addition to open caching, we have a working group for defining quality of experience metrics that would be used both by the content providers and by the carriers and would be published in a joint manner to show how video is being measured. We have a working group that tries to define for the operating systems what are the minimal requirements for content providers that are doing video that will allow them to develop the applications more quickly. And we are looking for ways to minimize the number of protocols and codecs that are required in order to ingest the video into the online video ecosystem. And we see more working groups that are going to be spanned. The beautiful thing about this element is suddenly you see all the layers in the ecosystem communicating and collaborating, and I'll give you examples moving forward. One of the working groups that I'm personally leading, with participation with other vendors, carriers, content providers, and CDNs, is the Open Caching Working Group. One of the things that we already accomplished this year, we published the guiding principles for open caching that practically states that open caching is a network function that will extend the existing CDN ecosystem that we have. And we are expecting to see carriers deploying open caching software by any vendor that would be adhering to the Streaming Video Alliance open architecture, in a way that any video that will be distributed, be it either live streaming or video on demand, the network will realize it for any content source and will cache it given the resources that are existing in the network. So we are seeing both mobile operators and landline operators buying into that concept, coming to the largest content providers and asking them to join that concept, and sign peering transit agreements with open caching in mind, assuming that nothing will break it moving forward. Net neutrality and the latest ruling by the FCC raised a lot of questions whether it's good or bad for carriers, whether it's good or bad for open caching. We see open caching as part of the open internet. More than that, what we see is that the latest ruling of net neutrality is calling carriers not to differentiate any specific content source and not to do prioritization of any specific content source, which means that the only way to scale video, if you believe into the concept that caching should scale all the way to the last mile, and we have announced just this year integration of caching into eNode B and base stations, and we are in discussions to even with some people in this room to integrate caching into airplanes that are delivering video streams. If you buy into that notion, the latest net neutrality do not allow you or recommends that you will not put specific closed system deep in your network because you practically prioritize or give advantage to those content sources. And that's part of the reason that we are promoting open caching with the largest content providers in a way that will support the open internet. Hbo Now is just the latest announcement of a new, big, very significant content source that is going to offer its content over the top or online. We are seeing more and more such announcements. And this is just to emphasize that the content that we see today online, or how big is online video today, is just the tip of the iceberg. The most important thing from my perspective regarding the Hbo Now announcement, it was the first time ever that a major content provider that is doing an announcement collaborated with open caching, and we practically had all the URL structured and the way that they are going to deliver it available ahead of the launch, and all the open caching systems in the field supported Hbo Now. And on the first weekend, it was Game of Thrones episode being launched from the get-go. And that shows you how collaboration can provide value across the ecosystem. It increases the quality of experience, reduces the cost for the end users, for the carriers, for the CDNs, and for the content providers. And we see more and more of that collaboration moving forward as long as you realize that the closed system is not a benefit for the content owner. With the Netflix and YouTube situation, this is a situation that is very much binary because we are just starting and they are very much dominant, not to say having kind of a monopoly in that specific field. I would probably be asked, and I would preempt that question, how does SSL is being involved with open caching, and how do we see the trend of SSL being influencing the adoption of open caching? The way we see it is that SSL is not a technology barrier. To a certain extent, it's not necessarily related even to privacy. SSL is just one way in order to deliver the content, and open caching systems and the architecture that we are building in the Streaming Video Alliance supports SSL as well. If we want to collaborate and find a way to do open caching, SSL is supported today. What you will hear from Qwilt and other members of the Streaming Video Alliance is that we support SSL in collaboration with content providers who would like to see their content being delivered from the edge at a better quality, and I would say at the same economics, if not even better economics from transit and peering pricing point of view than what we have today. One last comment about collaboration, just to emphasize the way we see it and how important it is for us. We have added just recently PeerUp into the Streaming Video Alliance, and we are working together with them. We have Cisco there, and from my perspective, it's not about competing, it's about finding an architecture that will provide value for the entire ecosystem. To a certain extent, we are opening everything that we are doing for competition in order to allow it to accelerate and get adopted far more quickly across the industry. Before I open it for questions, I will just give an analogy that I find to be very strong, emphasizing what we are doing. You may recall that the Romans tried to scale their empire by allowing water to be propagated to towns. And they used the aqueduct as the infrastructure for doing that. We find open caching as the way to scale online video for the next decade. And I believe that it will allow it to be delivered in every town, in every city, in the most effective way, using the open architecture that we are building today. And I'm sure that the next year will just emphasize it further. With that, I would be happy to open it for questions. Thank you. I can barely hear you. I did hear you SSL, though.
Sorry, SSL. How can you support SSL without content providers giving away their private keys to all of these various organizations that are part of the alliance?
Yeah. So the question was, how can we support SSL without content providers giving their SSL key across anyone that is practically delivering them? The answer is that this is a classic, I would say, cloud technology scaling problem that we are dealing with today. Think about a way in which there is a way to propagate virtual machines across any open cache that is available in the network in a way that the virtual machine will run in a secured manner that will not expose the SSL keys. We do not expect, at least at the first version or the next phase of the open architecture, to deal with the SSL keys themselves, but rather have a code contained by the content providers running those SSL keys in a secured cloud environment. The open caching element will orchestrate the resources for that virtual machines based on the user's demand. But this is something that is still being discussed within the open caching working group. Once it's finalized, it will be published like anything else we are doing in that working group. Any other question?
So how does that physically work for the service providers that are part of the open cache? And to what extent are you coordinating with the peering exchanges?
So from a physical point of view, we find that open caching kind of incentivize the carriers to build their cloud all the way to the last mile. What we see today, carriers are buying compute and storage, deploying it on top of their GGSNs, P gateways, CMTSs, etc. and having a server or a farm of servers on top of every one of them. They are using virtualization software to run the open caching software on top of it. And this is kind of an extension to the peering location. From a commercial point of view, assume that you are a big carrier, you have a peering agreement with a content provider. Once you deploy your open caching infrastructure, you're coming to the guy that you're doing peering with and saying, if you will cooperate or collaborate, it's for the benefit of all of us, we will do the peering agreement at 20% discount comparing to the peering price itself. And then the quality of experience is improved, but the economics are being dropped down because of that reason. I would also say that in any deployment that we are seeing, we are able to justify or do an ROI at lower prices than the transit prices that Dan has shared with you just before. So the economics for open caching are far lower than any CapEx build-out for core networks, for radio access network, and even for just the transit point themselves.
And who maintains the software and any managed component of the open cache?
The way that we as a vendor approach this problem, we designed the company from the start as a software company. So we are managing or offering carriers to manage the deployments remotely, and we are updating the software on the fly like a software as a service company, which provide an open caching service on top of a common infrastructure that is the cloud infrastructure on the last mile. Go ahead.
Can you talk more about Hbo Now, or how open caching used to that?
Please ask again. I didn't get the middle part.
Hbo Now, how is that using open caching?
So HBO Now is just one content source, just like Netflix, YouTube, and others. When an open caching vendor realizes that there is a significant content source that is about to be popular, we are going and figuring out their delivery mechanism and practically implementing them within the network. So think about any deployment that has an open caching today. The HBO Now, 70–80% of the consumed content is being delivered from the neighborhoods that are deployed with open caching across the US today automatically. Today, if you have a peering agreement between that carrier and the CDN that deploys, for example, Limelight, if he's delivering the HBO Now content, there is also monetization involved in that piece. But otherwise, it's transparent and the bits are just being delivered at a higher quality from the last mile.
Hi, good presentation.
Thank you.
Quick question. You mentioned, in the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned Netflix and Google as being closed systems. Netflix open source, their Global Connect or whatever it is.
Part of their Open Connect software,
Global
yes.
Connect,
Yes.
Right? I mean, I think that is not a closed system, approach, right? I mean, they are open. You can download their code and you can change it, etc. So how do you see?
I'll explain what is my perspective or interpretation of closed versus open. Netflix are only delivering the Netflix content. And they created vertical integration between the client and the server for everything that they deliver. If you want to use the same code as a carrier or as a network provider, you cannot leverage the Open Connect for other content sources. So it's not an open system, it's only something that is delivering Netflix. If you want one system that will deliver content for the entire set of sources, one of them being Netflix, you're not able to use the Netflix system. We are looking for a system that will automatically extend the existing Netflix, it's not replacing it, with an open architecture that will support them as well, not any different than other content providers.
Are you allowing the CDNs to monetize their delivery if you're transparently caching at the edge and taking 60, 70, 80% of the CDN's load? Are you giving them the logs to be able to go build their content providers as pseudo delivery agents of that content?
So the latter option is the option that we are offering. Eventually, it's for the carrier to build that type of partnership together with the CDNs. We have few carriers today that have implemented that type of partnership. The facilities from technology point of view and product point of view are available today. But the answer is it's an extension, and we feel that the monetization should be there in order to allow a quicker transition.
Because what if the CDNs
I would say that we find far more collaboration and motivation to collaborate with the CDNs than we have imagined when we started our journey. Most of the reason is because they cannot scale it, as Dan kind of mentioned, economically with continuous CapEx investment for caching system all the way to the last mile.
I perceive largely the benefits of local caching as being for on-demand services. Do you see or claim benefits for linear services?
Yes, absolutely. Think about caching for linear services as something that an open cache realizes that there is a live event, and there are many live events being broadcasted today with the latest services that are being offered on Twitter, with live streaming for sports, etc. But something that will prevent the need to actually broadcast the stream all the way through the internet to the last mile. The last mile will realize it, and you have kind of a dynamic multicast of URL or HTTP being happening on the last mile. The benefits are the same, just as video on demand, the implementation is different.
I'm sorry, were you suggesting multicasting on the last mile?
Yeah, I suggest that instead of broadcasting each and every linear stream across the entire internet or from the point of distribution of the CDN, the neighborhood will realize that there is a live popular event in the neighborhood and will distribute it automatically with one stream coming all the way from the originating CDN.
So the cache is actually doing multicast to unicast?
Unicast to multicast, that's right. Many unicasts are being transformed to a single multicast on the last mile. We can discuss it, later on technically if you would like. Any additional question?
Is the drone real?
Is what?
Is the drone real?
The drone, anything that we imagine and work together to accomplish is real.
Sorry, can I just ask a question? Have you got synergy with the IETF moves? There's been long-term development along which has kind of been obscured by CDN Federation moves and all sorts of other activities like that. But the IETF has for a long time been working for more harmony in the application layer for CDNs.
So
in tune with the IETF?
Yeah, so I would say that we are looking into it. We are not, on the Streaming Video Alliance, we are not a standard body. We are mostly a forum that comes to bring together an open architecture and best practices and allow the empirical or practicality to implement them. We may decide to take some of the work and allow IETF to standardize it. It's being discussed. It's not something that is happening right now.
But conversely, are you taking any of the IETF's work and assimilating it?
So the members of the group, like, for example, I just met with the CTO of Cisco last week, and he is like one of the first members of the IETF, are propagating ideas, concepts that have been developed there into the forum itself, but it's not necessarily happening in a formal manner. Thank you, guys.